So, as opposed to our knowledge by acquaintance and description of things, there's also knowledge of truths. And when we believe that we are making a true judgment about things, that is, we're making a claim about something in the world, we're saying that it is true that, it would seem reasonable that if challenged, that is, if someone were to ask us why we believe it, or more specifically, what it is that justifies that truth claim, that we should be able to give a reason. And that's the immediate thing that Russ talks about in this chapter, chapter 11, on intuitive knowledge. He starts out by saying there is a common impression that everything that we believe, everything that we believe is true, ought to be capable of proof, or at least of being shown to be highly probable. That turns out to be false. That is, that the whole point of intuitive knowledge is that there are some things that we believe that on the one hand we cannot prove, that is, we cannot give any justifying reason for their being true, but on the other hand, we believe that they don't need a justifying reason to be believed and to be accepted as being true. And this is a very sort of old problem in philosophy that Russell is discussing, and that is whether there are any self-evident truths. He goes on after the first paragraph to talk about some insistent Socrates, thinking of Socrates, the figure in philosophy who became famous by asking people why they believed what they did and challenging them to offer proof. Russell says that, well, if we imagine somebody who's very insistent in asking why do you believe that, or what is it that justifies that is a sort of game that we could play. That is, many of the truths that we hold, many of the beliefs that we have about the world, indeed can be justified, but on the basis of other beliefs that we have about the world that are connected to them, and that we can play this game for a while of offering one belief or one judgment or one claim as proof of another, but eventually we would hit rock bottom. That is, eventually we would hit something that could not be proved. And then the question is, well, where are we then? What does that mean? For instance, he talks about his stock example of our belief that the food that we're eating is most likely not poisonous. He says, in most questions of daily life, such as whether our food is likely to be nourishing and not poisonous, we shall be driven back to the inductive principle. That is the idea that, more or less the idea that the future will be much like the past. But beyond that, he says, there seems to be no further regress. The principle itself is constantly used in our reasoning, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, but there is no reasoning which, starting from some simpler self-evident principle, leads us to the principle of induction as its conclusion. And the same holds for other logical principles. Their truth is evident to us, and we employ them in constructing demonstrations, but they themselves, or at least some of them, are incapable of demonstration. And again, that being incapable of demonstration is just one side of it. The other complementary side that needs to be there is the idea that not only are they incapable of demonstration, they need no demonstration. That is, that they are truly self-evident. So the claim here is that there are self-evident truths. That is, that there are some truths that we hold. There are some beliefs that we have about things, about the universe, which are so basic and are so absolutely they're so important, and we can't do without them, and moreover that somehow they have a special nature, I guess, that in which they reveal themselves immediately as being true, that they do not need proof. And I think this is a very important aspect of Russell's thinking about philosophy, that not everything needs to be proved, that we have to start somewhere. And he's thinking of really thinking of logic and mathematics especially, in which we have deductive systems, and as we have bodies of propositions, the great majority of which are based upon other propositions, but we have to start somewhere. For instance, in geometry, we have to start with certain basic propositions about figures and about space, and there's no deeper level that we could go to establish those propositions. They simply have to be accepted in order to start the thing going and begin to deduce other things. Russell believes that we have intuitive knowledge of certain truths. Some of them, he says, he calls truths of perception. And this might be a good way of sort of getting the distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and intuitive knowledge here. He talks about the truths of perception are really truths about sense data. Now, importantly, he says, the actual sense data, that is, the things with which we are immediately acquainted, are neither true nor false. A particular patch of color which I see, for example, simply exists. It is not the sort of thing that is true or false. It is true that there is such a patch. So once I sort of begin talking about the patch of red color, once I make a proposition or a judgment about it, then I'm in the realm of truth or falsity. It is true that there is such a patch, true that it has a certain shape and degree of brightness, true that it is surrounded by certain other colors, but the patch itself, like everything else in the world of sense, is of a radically different kind from the things that are true or false, and therefore cannot properly be said to be true, not because it's false, but because it's not the kind of thing that can be either true or false. For something to be true or false, has to be in the form of a judgment or proposition or statement. Thus, whatever self-evident truths may be obtained from our senses must be different from the sense data from which they are obtained. That is, say I'm having a sense datum of a red patch. That's neither true nor false. But once I put it again in the form of a statement or make a judgment, then it can be true or false. He says, we see a patch of red, and we judge, quote, there is such and such a patch of red, or more strictly, quote, there is that. So we have things with which we are immediately acquainted. I think a patch of red, my sense datum. And then we have self-evident truths, which are statements about those things with which I am acquainted. So there are truths of perception, that is, and what does that mean? Self-evident truths of perception means some truths simply are there and must be accepted, and there are no other truths that can somehow justify them. Prove that they are true, demonstrate that they are true. They are simply true. That is, right now I'm looking at the camera. Russell would say I'm having a sense datum of the color black. I am acquainted with that sense datum, and I can form the proposition there is such and such a patch of black. Now that is a truth about my sense data, this particular sense datum. Can it be proved on the basis of other truths? No, it simply is self-evident that there is a patch of black in my visual field. And there are other things, truths of perception he talks about, more complex ones, not just that there is a patch of black, but for instance that it is rectangular, which is more complex. He talks a lot about memory here, which is very mysterious. How can I be sure that my memories are true, that they're accurate? Well, that just brings in the possibility of error. And one of the things, of course, that he talks about here is degrees of self-evidence. I think he introduces that concept in the discussion of memory, and that's something that I think is a big issue, and we'll talk more about.